which brings us right into step 5, which is live life consciously. The problem with such a big percentage of the population of the world is that they habituate actions, they do them over and over and over again, that they become robotic. They don't think about why they do things or what they're doing them for, or what the reason for doing things. They just do them. And these people say that's the way it is. But it's not the way it is. It's that way because you've never changed anything. You've never had, the courage maybe, or you've never had the ability to change things in your life. Now when we start living life consciously, we become aware of those things that we do want to change, and when we encounter a situation that gives us opportunity to change, we can embrace it. Okay, so step 5 is all about moving from the unconscious to the conscious and living life consciously. Okay, there's lots to this part of it. So there are 2 ways of living, really. There's unconscious living, which I would say quite a large proportion of the population live unconsciously. And then there's conscious living. And let's see what the differences are here. When we live life unconsciously, we're entranced by conditioning. We're oblivious to the reasons why our lives aren't working. We repeat the same routines day in and day out. We make the same mistakes over and over again, and we react to the same situations time and time again. Okay. And Einstein said insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. And it's so true. Right? We never ask questions when we live unconsciously. We never ask, why is life this way? What am I doing wrong? What can I change to progress? These are questions when we live life consciously we should be asking ourselves on a daily basis. If something's wrong, we'll feel it instantly. Ask ourselves, what's wrong? Why am I feeling this way? Why is it this way? What can I change? But when we live unconsciously, we never challenge our actions. We carry on oblivious. Okay, so again, let's talk about living life consciously in step 5. Step 5, it's really important in that when we live life unconsciously, we become reactive beings. And we've all done it. We've reacted and we say, I don't know what come over me then. I wasn't myself then. This is an indication of people who are unaware, who are living life unconsciously, who are suffering somnambulism and sleepwalking through life. Because when we're aware, when we live life consciously, we know that every feeling we have, a reaction we have, stems from what's going on in our mind. It stems primarily from pictures, movies, thoughts and sounds that are going on in our mind. Every feeling comes about as a result of pictures and sounds that are in our mind. So what we need to do when we react to a certain situation, when we take off, when we have an eruption, we need to catch in that moment what precisely is going through our head, what is initiating that. Living life consciously is not just about being aware of, the flowers and the trees and whatever. It goes much deeper than that. If we want to propel ourselves into, a fourth dimension of existence, into a new way of being, into a life, of radical transformation, we've got to be far more aware than just be aware of the plants and the flowers and whatever. We need to be aware of what's going through our mind, because what's going through our mind in the form of pictures and in the forms of sound, it is the software that's driving the hardware of our body. Okay, so when we say live life consciously, we're saying let's become aware at any given moment when we have a a reaction that we're not expecting to a certain situation, what at that point is going through our mind? This way we'll get in touch with the catalyst that is giving rise to our outbursts of anger, to our episodes of guilt, even to, you know, the thoughts that are fueling our sense of futility. What's life about? And we'll certainly that way get in touch with our unresolved issues. And as therapists and as mentors, it's our job once again to enable people to be able to elicit. These things are called strategies. When we get pictures, and a sequence of pictures and sounds in our mind is called a strategy, and every strategy leads to an outcome. Okay, so we've been talking about living life consciously, and we've been saying basically, you know, that's not just about being aware of what's going on around us. If we want to stay in the present moment, fair enough, but lots of our problems stem, well, all of our problems really stem from what's going on, our relationship with what's going on in our mind, which is often a distorted version of reality. So what I'd like to do here is look at what's called strategies. And I want to start off by talking about objects. There's a strand of psychology called psychodynamics, and one aspect of that is something called object relations. So first of all, so we can educate ourselves as to what's going on in our mind, I'd like to talk about what objects are. So really, initially, our unconscious mind can be viewed as a dwelling, as a house, if you like, that's unpopulated. And over the years, it becomes populated. And it becomes populated by versions of people that we know in the external world. So if you think of ourselves when we're born, just for ease of teaching, that our mind is a blank canvas. Okay, let's say there's nothing in it. That's not quite true, but let's just view it that way for simplicity. And then what happens, first of all, our parents tend to us. Okay, so our mind becomes populated with versions of our parents. So in our mind we might have a mental version of our father, a mental version of our mother. And independent of whether our mother and father are there in reality, we carry these people round in our head. And in a sense, the dialogue that they speak to us becomes our internal dialogue. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's the way we become programmed. We internalise the people who are significant in our life. We take them into the house of our psyche, and their dialogue and their belief systems we start to absorb because we carry them around with us in our heads. Each internalisation, be it your mother, your father, a priest, a clergyman, a friend, your siblings, whatever, is called an object in psychological terms. Okay, so when we speak of psychological objects, really, for purposes of this philosophy, we're talking about internalizations of real life people. Okay, and like I say, as we absorb them into our psyche, even when they're not geographically close to us, we carry them round in our heads, and the things that they've relayed to us via talking is still going around in our head. So in a way we adopt their belief systems, we adopt their points of view, and that becomes our internal dialogue. Okay? So as we go through life, it becomes populated, our mind becomes populated with representations of people that are actually in our life. Okay? Right, so let's just have a look at this diagram here. So this is the unconscious mind. Now, one of the things I've sort of invented, if you like, it's taken from psychology. And what I've said here is that at this point in time, when we're young, the self, that part of us that we refer to as I or me, okay, is malleable. We know what we mean by that. It's easily moulded. Okay? So what we've got here is that when our unconscious mind starts to become populated, we can see that we have In here, we have versions of our parents, we have versions of our school teachers, we have versions of our siblings, extended family, clergymen. They're all taking occupancy in our mind at this point. Okay, so you can see our mind has gone from a blank canvas to heavily populated by people, by internalizations of real people in our life. So all of this chatter, like one person has a point of view that opposes another point of view, is going on, which then gives rise to conflict in our mind. Okay, but back to the objects. Some of these school teachers, parents, peers, siblings, some of them will be supportive so that the dialogue that we're absorbing from them lifts our self-esteem and enhances our life and aids us in life and is nurturing, whilst others, you might have a school teacher that called you all sorts of derogatory things, and they will sabotage our life. Okay, but we're carrying them all around in our head, so even though they're not with us physically, they're still with us psychologically. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's move it. There we've got a mind that's populated with objects, and that is affecting our malleable self. It's moulding us as a person. And we're very, in what they call the imprint period in psychology, we're very easily moulded. And that's basically between 0 and 7. We absorb most of the information we're going to absorb through life happens between 0 and 7. But we are very easily influenced because we need to strengthen our ego or strengthen our sense of self, become more independent. So here, during early life, we are highly impressionable. These people get into our heads and we are heavily influenced by their opinions and beliefs. So does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, we were a blank slate. Then, we interact with people. These people get inside us, so to speak, into our heads, and we carry them round with us. Their dialogue and their belief systems, then we start to absorb. If they believe and they relay that they think we'll amount to nothing, and they use all derogatory remarks about them, that's going to have an effect on ourselves, because we're going to carry that round in our heads, and that is going to lower our self-esteem. Okay? Let's just read on. Their voices become our internal dialogue, and their beliefs become our beliefs. Okay? What we refer to as I is malleable, constantly changing in accordance with our interactions with these significant others. Okay, and this is commonly known as the imprint period. Okay, so really early on in life, we're going to set the standard, aren't we? Depending on what type of people around us, how they treat us, and their perception of us. When we're young, we're going to take on board their beliefs and their opinions. Okay, and what happens is this. You can see that, right, to some degree, these objects, these internalizations, will either nurture us or damage us. Okay, the mind at this point has gone from a blank canvas to polarized. You've got people who love you and nurture you. You've got people who treat you with disdain and think very little of you. Okay, this gives mixed messages to what we call I, to the central core of ourselves. Okay, the saboteur is the part of the mind that constantly persecutes us and sends us negative messages. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this has probably come from real life people who have thought little of us and have given us all of these messages. Now they've become internalized and they're part of our mind, they're part of our psyche. The saboteur pollutes our mind and destroys our self-esteem. The saboteur negatively distorts our perception of the world. The saboteur is destructive. Okay. On the other side, you've got the nurturing one. And also, the nurturing object, say you had a mother who was nurturing, a school teacher who was nurturing, a grandmother who was nurturing. All of these would be separate objects that bond together in our mind to form the opposing force, if you like, to the saboteur, which might be called the nurturer, freeze. Okay. So what we've got then is these like things, what we get is this then. So now you can see here from the diagram, I've put that, in this particular example, my peers were supporting, my parents were supporting, my extended family was supporting. They all, you can see that they will all bond together, as denoted by the red in that picture. They will all bond together to form one big object called the nurturer. And that will be the voice that will comfort me in times of troubles, the inner voice that will comfort me in times of trouble. Again, you can label it what you want, but it's a positive force in the mind. Opposing that, in this particular example, I've put my school teachers were destructive. This is not necessarily true, by the way, because I had some good school teachers. Siblings were destructive. Clergymen were destructive. Okay? So, this is just a general example. Here, you will get, they will all bond together and they'll form a large object then called, psychological object called the saboteur. It's this part that when you're going to do something, when you go for an interview, will be whispering in your ear, you'll never do this, you'll amount to nothing, you're useless, you can't do this, you can't do that. That is the tapes of all of those people in the past that have treated you with disdain and derogatory. What we need to do when we live life consciously is be aware that they're not our opinions, they're not our beliefs. We've absorbed them from other people who've probably got issues of their own. In fact, people who put other people down in general have very low self-esteem, and the reason that they put other people down is to elevate their own status, and it doesn't work. But if we're not aware, if we live life unconsciously, we'll take their beliefs and adopt them. So therefore we'll treat ourselves with disdain. When we live life consciously, which is step 5, we become aware of these mechanisms in the mind. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Any questions on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. When the saboteur dominates, okay, in that one that I showed you before, there was a balance. There was an equal number of destructive objects to an equal number of nurturing objects. So we had equilibrium, if you like. One may cancel out the other. Okay, the problem arises when there is a bias in the mind, which is the next one. So when the saboteur dominates, we become destructive. Our actions become self-defeating. We treat ourselves with disdain, and our view of life becomes really grim. So here, as an example now, okay, what's going on in our unconscious mind severely affects, really programs as to how we're going to operate in the external world. Okay, there's a direct relationship here. So here we've got a very unbalanced mind. We've got our parents, our extended family, school teachers, siblings and clergymen were all destructive. Okay? And the only people who were supportive were our peers in this particular example. Okay? So here we've got a major imbalance. We've got a massive object that's influencing our malleable self. And this object is destructive. We've got a massive saboteur here. And people who have been through that sort of negative circumstance, you know, in the younger years, may well have this massive big saboteur. Everything they do, they'll have an inner voice telling them that they're useless. What we need to do is educate them as to go on, because that is not their belief, that is somebody else's belief, who's probably got lower self-esteem than they'll ever have. Bear in mind, people who are constantly derogatory towards other people do so to elevate the sense of self. Okay. So this is what it will look like now. If we colour them in and we depict how the mind will look, you can see that in the sort of violet colour there, or purple colour, we've got a massive big saboteur at work in our psyche, and we've only got a very small nurturer. So our malleable self is going to be programmed to be self-defeating, quite frankly. Okay. What we need to do as therapists here, we need to educate people as to this mechanism and say that as we strengthen the malleable self, then we become aware that actually these weren't my beliefs. I didn't believe that. These were people who were picking on me because they felt so very little about themselves. I just become a scapegoat. I'm not having that anymore. This is what happens when the ego becomes strengthened, when our sense of self becomes... See, this way what we're doing, we're living life, if you like, from the outside in. We're letting outside influence what's going on in our life, the external world. The external world is getting within us and influencing how we operate in the world. What we need to do really is strengthen our sense of self and for us to determine how we're going to be in the world. Okay, here's some examples of the messages that the saboteur may give. Okay, so now you can see that the malleable self now has been bombarded so much by the saboteur that I've changed it from the malleable self to the negatively conditioned self. Okay? Right, this is the destructive self, the self-defeating self. And these are messages you're useless, you should be ashamed of yourself, life's boring, you're a coward. But you can see everyone hates you, you're pathetic. That's the type of internal message that the saboteur will give you. And that's come from other people. We must recognise that. That's not what we think of ourselves. We've adopted the opinions of other people because at that time we weren't enlightened enough to realise that it was other people who were saying this and they had their own agenda. Does that make sense? Mm. Okay. Let's change now. Okay, we've seen the development of the saboteur. Okay, the internal saboteur. Let's change that now to the sobriety saboteur. It's the same type of thing, but this time it's appertaining directly to drink. Okay, the sobriety saboteur is a derivative of the internal saboteur. It's one that we treats us with disdain again, derogatory comments, but this time it will also try to dupe us into going back to drink. Okay, so the sobriety saboteur is an aspect of the saboteur whose sole purpose it is to drive us back to drink and destroy us. When we live life consciously, we'll become very aware. When we get a whisper in our mind saying, have a drink, that'll solve this problem. When we see a picture of a bottle of vodka and we're compelled to go and have it, this is the sobriety saboteur manifesting in our mind. When we live life consciously, we don't just go and get a bottle and drink it. We say, what's going on here? You know, this is the accumulation of all the negativity I've experienced in my life coming back to haunt me. I am not letting that control my life anymore. Then the negatively conditioned self is, if you like, beginning to become positively conditioned, is changing, is transformation. Okay? It says there, we think in pictures and sounds. Okay, nothing new there. And a sequence of these pictures and sounds is called a strategy. A strategy leads to an outcome. Let's see a practical thing. Back to neuro-linguistic program here. Okay, so this chap in here, he's experiencing alcoholism. He's just been sacked from work. Now the strategy here, the sounds in his mind, you are sacked, the sound of his boss, you are sacked. You will never work again, you are worthless. And he's got a picture of his boss telling him this. Okay? The sobriety saboteur then kicks in and says, have a drink, that'll sort you out. But this chap he's gone past the abreactive threshold. Drink is never going to sort that problem out again. If he hadn't crossed the abreactive threshold, if he drank, what would happen?
He'd just go into a cycle of depression again.
Well, what would happen if he hadn't crossed the abreactive threshold? If he hadn't, no.
Oh, if he hadn't.
Yeah. What would he do?
He'd feel better. He'd feel better, and
he'd feel better if he were.
If he had a drink.
That's right. Yeah. So in pre-abreactive threshold, this chap he can hear the voice of his derogatory voice of his boss saying, "You were sacked, you will never work again, you were worthless." And he's seen the pictures. We think in pictures and sounds, bear in mind, and that gives rise to feeling. So he's feeling terrible about himself because of them pictures and sounds going out in his mind. Then the sobriety saboteur kicks in, sounds in the mind, have a drink, that'll sort you out. If he hadn't crossed the abreactive threshold, he would drink, he would become uninhibited, and he wouldn't care it down for a little while about what and he'd forget about it for a little while. And then when the effects of drink, that would hit him right back in the face, but it'd be worse next time. The sobriety saboteur will kick in again, and that cycle, destructive cycle, will keep repeating itself. Here, let's say he has crossed the abreactive threshold, and he's accepted fully that drink isn't going to cure that problem. Okay, so now he needs to resolve the problem. And that's going back to working as therapists. But that is, in NLP terms, what we would explain, that is a psychological strategy. I've not done it in boxes. I'll show you boxes a bit later on. Okay. So here's how the sobriety saboteur would. If the sobriety saboteur kicked in at that chap, say he'd crossed the abreactive threshold, but he hadn't he hadn't become strong enough to avoid relapse, and the next thing that happens, the sobriety saboteur kicks in with its cons, okay, and it says you'll feel much better if you have a drink. Just one drink will take all your worries away. A drink solves all your problems. You know, that's one real subtle way of doing it. If I just have 1 or 2 drinks, I'll be okay. It's nonsense. People know who drink, they can't do that. I'm bored, there's no purpose to life, I need to drink. That's the way the sobriety saboteur. When we live life consciously on this philosophy, on this program, we realise that's the time we have to be vigilant. That's the time we need to do something. Okay, here we've said you can't live a positive life with a negative mind. It's impossible. You know, so we need the transformative effects really of the alchemist, and that's why this is called alchemy. We're going to transform the negative mind into a positive mind, and we're going to reach our optimal potential. We're going to realise our life purpose, and we're going to live life to the full. That's what this is all about. Okay, I just want to reiterate what's going on in our head when we think negatively. Okay, depending on the nature of the pictures and the sounds in our minds, okay, so what's going on in our minds, okay, that interacts with the hypothalamus, okay, which is in the brain, right. The hypothalamus will then produce chemicals conducive to the nature of the pictures and the thoughts in our mind. So if we're thinking stinking thinking, as it's called, if we're thinking horrible thoughts and that, the hypothalamus will say, oh, you want to feel shitty today. What we'll do, we'll produce some chemicals that will make you feel shitty all day. Okay, based on the thoughts that you're feeding to it. Okay, what happens then is that it'll disperse these chemicals throughout your body, which will determine how you feel, and sure enough, you make sure you feel shitty. Feelings then drive our actions. You know, the thing that gets us to motivate us are our feelings, which have come from our thoughts. So then we'll get up and we'll probably act in self-defeating ways, because that's the way we feel. Okay, so we go for the drink in this particular one. Okay, all our actions that have derived from our thoughts have consequences. In this case, I know it only through, I've done this so many times in my life. There he is, hanging over the toilet, throwing his guts up because he's drank again. Okay, and the outcome of that is that, you know, all of our actions in life have consequences. Incidentally, the Sanskrit word karma simply means action. That's what it means. It's not got any of these fancy definitions that you hear bandied about. It simply means karma, action. And all actions have consequences, which is where you get what you give out, you get back, basically. Now, the consequences of this, here we've got somebody who was feeling crap, had negative thoughts going through the mind. The hypothalamus mixes the chemicals conducive to the crappy thoughts. Okay, the chemicals are then distributed throughout the body, making the person feel bad. When he feels bad, that compels him to go and get a drink because he wants to escape the way he's feeling. Okay, then he's got his head down the toilet, throwing up, and you'll see he feels imprisoned once again. That's all started, not from the bottle, that all started from what manifested in that person's mind, the sobriety saboteurs. Can we see the importance of that?
Mm.
So if we change what is in that person's head, we can stop that unfoldment of negativity. Okay? Ralph Waldo Emerson said the ancestor to every action is a thought. Every action is driven by a thought. Okay? Him taking a drink, throwing his guts up and then feeling imprisoned in his mind, all stemmed from the thoughts going round in our mind. And we can't necessarily choose the thoughts that go through our mind because there's so many, but we can certainly pick the ones that we want to act on. I liken this to standing on a railway station. And we can stand and we can watch the trains come and go. We don't have to get on board. That's very much like thoughts. We can watch them going through our mind. We don't have to get on board. We can become aware of the negative ones, but we don't have to act on them. Okay? Then we can replace our thoughts. We have the ability as human beings to choose positive thoughts, to choose life-enhancing thoughts. What's going to happen then if we start to lean towards having positive thoughts in our mind? The hypothalamus will then mix chemicals conducive to happiness, and that will reflect through our body and feelings, and that will drive positive action. So there's a very, very powerful process going on in here. Can everybody see that? Good. Okay. After we recognise the manifestations of the sobriety saboteurs, we need to realise that the promises made are really a seductive ploy to drag us back into hell and imprison us. Okay, so think about them little voices in the head, just one drink, you can control your drink, drink will make everything right from you. And think about what happened to you before. Has any of them things ever come true since you've passed the abreactive threshold? And the answer is no. The only thing that's happened, although the sobriety saboteurs made all these promises of heaven and bliss and whatever, all that happened is that you felt destroyed and imprisoned yourself in a dark denizen of your mind. So, there we go. The thing to do when we live life consciously and we become aware of the manifestation of the sobriety saboteurs in our mind is to recognise what they're saying to us is a scam. That's the first step. Reject it. It's a scam. The discussion this morning has looked at the developments of the saboteur. How through objects which are internalisations of significant others in our life through the developmental period, how the destructive objects bond together to form what we call the saboteur. Then we've looked at the manifestations of the sobriety saboteur, which really is just an extension of the saboteur. That is, its sole purpose basically is to get us to drink destructively. And this is all about living life consciously, familiarising ourselves with exactly what's going on in our mind regarding, these destructive elements, how they've materialised and how they've grown and how they manifest. Okay, and we've talked about the malleable self, okay, and when we get negatively conditioned, we've said that the malleable self, the impressionable self, becomes moulded into what we then call the negatively conditioned self. Okay, when we educate ourselves regarding the messages from the saboteur, these derogatory messages that are life-denying in many ways, that will put us down, and we get the awareness, then we have the ability to reject them. Okay, so one of the things we must have at this point is self-love. Okay, put it this way, if we've been given negative comments through our lives by certain faculties, by certain people in our lives, then we need to counteract these, and we need to start giving ourselves nurturing messages. Now, we can give ourselves nurturing messages by becoming a positive object in our own mind. In other words, self-parenting. Okay? And this is where we come on to step 6.